So this is my presentation. I have titled it Unpacking Social Constructs One Term at a Time. And I have 5 terms. One is identity, privilege, colorism, toxic masculinity, and feminism. So to start off with identity, a personal connection to this word is that I have struggled with discovering who and what I want to be known as, or who I want to be known as, and I know that that is a very specific thing that people tend to freak out about, and I think identity is a very big part of just who you are, because people tend to judge you for it, so there's a lot of thought on why identity is so important. My connection to the reading, I thought that this quote was really resonant to identity, is socioeconomic factors in combination with early but enduring views of race have led to considerable suffering within disadvantaged racial groups. Racial discrimination often coincides with racist mindsets whereby the individuals and ideologies of one group come to perceive the members of outgroups both racially defined and morally inferior. And I think this is really important just because a lot of people, like I said, tend to judge based off of what they see at first, or even just generalized views about certain racial groups and stuff. And I think a lot of people have to think twice about how they identify without the fear of getting judged or mistreated. This is an image that I chose for this. I think it describes it beautifully just because there's so many colors, so many personalities that you can take, so many perspectives that you can take on just one picture. And identity is not always straightforward. It is a blob sometimes. You never know how you're going to identify or just simply what you want to take from that. And it's also based off of perspective. Anybody can think that you identify a certain way, or you yourself think that you identify a certain way. So it's all about perspective, and there's a lot of things that you can do with abstract art as well. So I think identity is a word. Privilege is my next word. My personal connection with it was that I've always really found myself receiving the privilege rather than not getting it due to my complexion, and a lot of it in the Latino community, just because it's always güerita or blanquita, a lot of that, and in a way it's a very quiet type of privilege most of the time, where they give me an opportunity more over someone else, or they consider me for something, especially in music since I'm a singer. So a lot of the times it would go to someone that looked more like me rather than someone with a darker complexion. So, growing up, there was definitely a lot of feelings of guilt, of me not deserving the spot, or simply because they wanted a better fit for the camera rather than the actual talent itself. Some of the connection to the reading is a chart that is shown on page 6 of the Zuzu Right article. It shows a lot of the percentages and the demographics and from the 3 main communities in the 1940s here in LA. And the Chavez Ravine was one of the lower income, where it had a lot of Mexican communities or Mexican people, and Alpine Street was very middle class. There was still Latinos in there, but it was slowly starting to decrease the number. And then when we got to Temple Street community, where it was more upper class incomes, there was less Latino scene and more European immigrants that got more chances and more income simply because of what they looked like. So I think that is a very good representation of privilege, just because if people think European, they think white, they lead to more privilege. This image is what I chose for it, the social pyramid structure. It shows definitely a lot of the bottom of that pyramid is just the working class, the class that usually suffers a lot and doesn't get the recognition that they deserve, and sometimes is the victim of white privilege, simply because sometimes people are horrible like that. And towards the top, it's usually, it starts most of the time getting clearer in skin complexion, which is horrible, but it tends to happen. So that's usually the mental image that people tend to graph you in based off of background, income, education, stuff like that. My next topic is colorism. So personal connection. As a musician, like I said, I've seen a lot of this, and it's happened with me a lot. And I also had an experience with like a manager slash promoter that specifically told me that, you're more camera fit. You just work better for a camera. Your skin helps with that, and like lighting. It's just so much easier to work with you rather than someone else that has a darker complexion. It's just too much work. So that's never a great thing to hear. But it is something that happens to this day. And a connection to the reading, the quote is, in modern society, some people who consider themselves white actually have more melanin, a pigment that determines skin color in their skin, than other people who identify as black. So I chose this one simply because sometimes what is on the outside really shouldn't matter, and it doesn't really matter how you look, it's just how you feel, how you identify as yourself, and how you present yourself to the world, and just really trying to have that positive outlook and not really leaning into colorism. And this image that I chose is significant just because a lot of people tend to have that internalized shame for something that they can't control. I know there's also a video of like little kids who were shown a white doll and a black doll, and they were asked which one was prettier, and a lot of them chose the white doll, but none of them really had an explanation to why she was pretty or prettier, just besides the fact that she was white. So I thought that was very interesting. And my next topic is toxic masculinity, personal connection. Once again, music, very interesting community. So it's very common in the music world still. Another experience with a manager and promoter. This one specifically said that women, it's harder to work with women because they are not to be trusted since they want to start having kids and a family. So they tend to not work with women in music or singers or just instrumentalists in general, just because they're women and they will, quote unquote, leave the project hanging and we lose money. And that was, it's a very hard thing to listen to when you're trying to make it in the music industry. And also, another personal connection, I guess, was that there have been few men in my life that have tried to break the cycle of toxic masculinity, try to break the social norm, the social norm roles, which I am very grateful for, my dad being one of them, and just being open to learning about modern social cues. The next thing is connection to the reading. So this is a quote from the Michigan Daily on Machismo Must Go, and it says, on a societal level, the role of the macho functions as a collective group of dominating men in all spheres of life, from the employment force to ruling political and economic institutions. So it ties into the word of toxic masculinity just because it just describes a bit more about what the word is, and on a more societal level, of course, and just simply what it means in Latino communities most of the time, and how like you're the man of the house because you work and you bring the money in and you finance these things, so that makes you head of the house and more important and more dominant, rather than your spouse who just cleans or whatever. And it shouldn't be that way, but there is that sense and that ideology to this day. And the image that I chose was this. I chose this because it is part of an art exhibition that shines a light on masculinity and men's mental health in London. And I thought it was a very interesting way to bring light to the topic, just because it gives that extra sense of vulnerability, because I know a lot of men don't put themselves in a position where you can put all those things on them, or just see them cry to begin with, or just be vulnerable. So I thought it was very interesting to see that captured on a picture or in a picture. Just being vulnerable, which is something that they are not allowed to do most of the time, because society says that it's not man to cry, it's not man enough to cry. My last word is feminism, and personal connection to this is, it's a very strong belief of mine. I think feminism is still very much present, and I think it's going to keep on growing as much as possible. Time is now, and change is definitely happening. As a woman today, in today's world, fighting to be not equal to men, but just having equal opportunities and just equity for all genders and race, I think is one of the most important things. Equity, meaning that you have the same chances. How you get there will be based off of your personal route, your personal journey, and it will be adapted to you, to your necessities, rather than just straight equality, because not everybody is the same, so you can't ask for the same exact things as everybody else. So I think it's more rather equity than equality. Connection to the reading, it's another article called To Latinx or To Non-Latinx, A Question of Gender Inclusivity versus Gender Neutrality. Gender inclusivity, on the contrary, acknowledges gender as a source of disadvantage and, most important, explicitly challenges binary notions of gender and recognizes the plurality of identities beyond feminine, masculine dimensions. Examples, gender queer, gender non-binary, gender fluid, agender. So I just think it's very important, just because it's inclusive, just what feminism is. It is just wanting to have equality for people, equity for people, including people, just getting people's rights, simple rights, basic human rights. So I think including gender inclusivity into that is also a very big part of feminism, especially in trans communities, acknowledging them as women, trans men. It's very important into also trans rights and trans lives. And the image that I chose for this is well-behaved women rarely make history, and these are some of the influential women that have made history in the past years as the feminist movement started. And if it wasn't for these women, we wouldn't have a lot of inventions that were created by women. The first women in many things, first women in space, the first Black First Lady. We have Frida Kahlo, inspirational painter, activist. Malala, also an activist. We have Kamala Harris. We have Rosa Parks. Harriet Tubman. A lot of these women, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was part of the Roe v. Wade and was very important in the feminist movement. So I think that if we follow in these women's footsteps, we are pretty much unstoppable as women and as leaders of the next generation. So I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.